Well, I think the point has been made in the writings in so many places, and I've mentioned it here today, that preparing for eternal life, it's important that we search out the writings about the subject. We look at the writings about the second birth, and we see what Abdu'l-Baha says will be the consequence of attaining the spirit of faith. It's so great that I dare say nobody in the room would claim that they have it, looking at that definition. Of course, all these things are gradual and by stages and so on. But still, there are amazing claims. How you attain to a full knowledge of things, how you penetrate the mysteries of existence, how you're alive with the love of God, how a ray of this universal mind is cast into the heart of the righteous soul and illumines their understanding of all things. Oh. At least we have to be aimed in that direction, striving for it, dissatisfied with ourselves, if you will. Self-satisfaction is about the last thing you want to worry about in this life. He's given us a very high standard. As long as we're moving towards that standard, we're okay. He talks about the next life, and he says, Allah says that what the souls of the dwellers in the Crimson Ark, the ones that really are accepted in the kingdom, when they go to the next world, they're ushered into the company of the prophets of God, who will inquire of them that which they have suffered in the path of God. Now, if you haven't suffered very much, you'll probably have a very short interview. But if you've suffered nothing but difficulties from the beginning to the end, you'll have a lot to talk about and a lot to enjoy in their company. It's a curious kind of a setting that they provide for us. We're going to be looking into the eyes of Shoghi Effendi, and he's going to be wondering what we accomplished as a result of the inspiration that he left behind, such a priceless heritage that he's given us. Calls the Westerners, and now the Easterners who are amongst us are also part of the Western tradition now. You're living here, this spiritual descendants of the Dawnbreakers. So we've got some material and spiritual descendants of the Dawnbreakers in the same people. It's wonderful. Texas is greatly blessed. I remember seeing messages coming from friends in Texas with so many strange names at first for Westerners, you know. You wondered how Texas was producing these kind of Shakibanajad and things like that, different names of various sorts. And now with a new generation of believers coming from the Persian and Iranian exiles, we have another generation. This happened also in South America. Some of the pioneers went very early in the 50s, and their children grew up, and those children became key believers and such a help to the community there. And they married either each other or they married Brazilians, and the whole thing's going forward in a very nice way. It takes sometimes a generation or two, you know, the older generation is still attached and thinking maybe it'll go back home or something will change or something happen. We don't know how that's going to be. But in the meanwhile, pour out your services and the inspiration that you have and the prayers you have for the friends, that the cause can grow and become consolidated wherever you are. The preparing for eternal life is, of course, serving the cause of God. In a sense, the greatest blessing is teaching the cause. It attracts the highest confirmations that we have available to us when we mention the name of God, when we mention Baha'u'llah's name, when we teach the cause, when we introduce people to it, when we pray every morning to help me to find waiting souls. Not everybody's ready, but there are waiting souls. We're assured that by the revelation itself, and Shoghi Effendi said there's at least 2 or 3% of waiting souls every place. That doesn't seem very high, but it's a lot of people if you're counting in the hundreds of thousands in a locality. Baha'u'llah, move me so that I encounter some of these waiting souls. And then Baha'u'llah, give me the good sense to recognize that this is a waiting soul instead of passing them up the way we do so often without realizing it. We cannot judge, Shoghi Effendi says, who's going to be receptive and who isn't going to be receptive. If you find yourself in a position to deliver the message, which I hope you'll put yourself in that position, let the other person decide if they're going to be receptive or not. Let them at least hear the name Baha'i, the name Baha'u'llah. Shoghi Effendi, in the last years of his life, kept repeating 4 elements for Baha'i life, for our Baha'i life. Some of this is we've already referred to. The first one is prayer. The second one is meditation. The third one is study. And the fourth one is action. And he said we should create an equilibrium between these. Now you realize 3 of those are internal development, so that the fourth one becomes effective. The action becomes effective by the quality of our prayers, by the nature of our meditation, by the earnestness of our study of the teachings. That sets us up, if you will, so that when we take action and we open our mouths, we've got the goods behind it, so to speak, to be effective in our teaching and spreading of the faith. In the old days, I mean in the 50s, when the pilgrims were in the presence of the guardian, he spoke, he talked about this, and he said that for the prayer and meditation, we should look to the Persians as models. The spirit of devotion that they had, the way they pray, the way they meditate, was a useful model for us. As to the study of the cause, he said we should turn to the Germans. Now you realize just about that time, he named 2 hands of the cause among the Germans who were great scholars of the faith, Dr. Muschlegel and Dr. Grossman, both of whom had learned some of the Eastern languages, had some notions about Persian and Arabic and so on, and were very scholarly. Anything but superficial, Shoghi Effendi said, the Germans, in their study of the cause. So he said that was a good model. And at that time, and I don't know how that applies, all of this applies now, he said that for action they should look to the Americans. Shoghi Effendi had launched the World Crusade. He called on the Friends to arise and go out. He lamented that more hadn't arisen to go out, but the Americans filled more goals than anybody else on the planet, and won many of those, the crowns of knighthood, of being knights of Baha'u'llah in the different territories around the world. And to the pride, to the pleasure of the guardian, members of the American National Assembly went international pioneering at that time. You can imagine that was a terrific challenge and a wonderful example to the Friends. A side note again. Rhea Khanum sitting at the table in the early 50s. Shoghi Effendi is talking about the opening of 130 virgin territories. And he says that I'm thinking of naming the souls that arise and go to these territories as knights. Rhea Khanum interjects politely, but in her own inimitable fashion, Shoghi Effendi, what are you going to call the women? Knighties? They said Shoghi Effendi went on talking about what he was talking about. Didn't look at her, didn't respond at all to that. So we can see that an equilibrium between these requires a whole lot of attention to our own inner lives, so that we keep the compass of our lives on the north of the cause, on the goals of the cause completely. And to do this, we need to study the writings along with whatever else we do, and along with the institute courses. And some of you will say, well, the institute courses, I don't need to take the institute. I've been studying the Baha'i writings for 25 years. What am I going to go to the institute course for? The Institute course not to deepen you in the faith. The Institute course is so that you will understand what the new believers are learning along the way in their training and have some sympathy for it and be able to draw on those elements and that preparation that's in the courses for the new believers that haven't had 25 years of Baha'i studies. So don't think that one is a substitute for the other. We still have an individual obligation, even if the community isn't organizing a lot of study classes. We have an individual responsibility to study the writings, to deepen ourselves constantly, both in terms of so we will be able to effectively teach the cause, and also in terms of preparing for eternal life, enhancing the character of our spiritual natures, delivering ourselves from all of the lower aspects of existence which constantly pull on us. Preparing for eternal life requires, I think it was the Imam Ali that said this originally, said that we should live our lives spiritually as if we're going to die this evening. We should be prepared to face our Maker today, spiritually, all the time. Materially, we should live our lives as if we're going to live forever, keeping our affairs organized, paying our debts, settling the difficulties that we have, assisting others always. And there is a question about these settling debts. They don't go away, and we want to try to settle the debts of our relatives if they've gone on without that being settled. There's a whole lot of measuring of justice in the next world. And there's some tablets about, I'll refer to this maybe one of these times they're published in Persian Arabic, but they're not published in English, where he says that debts that haven't been paid in one season to be paid in another season, the character of the debt changes because of the changing situation of the time, you know. If I'm going to pay you, repay you seeds, I want to pay you seeds in the time that you can harvest, you can plant and harvest the food. Otherwise, you lose another year of earnings. There's all kinds of subtle things about owing money. It's better not to have great debts if we can avoid it. And certainly not think that death is a way of getting out of them altogether. And our relatives have to think of that also in settling our debts before hukukul is paid on our estates and such details as that. The soul is called to account for its actions. And this is interesting how Baha'u'llah talks about that, how the soul will become aware of the value of its actions at the time of its death. This is so parallel to the writers who are collecting stories about near-death experiences, where people have passed to the other side and then they come back, and how they see a review of their whole lives before their eyes, and how some of them are astonished with how small actions that they thought were small actions are becoming the means of their eternal existence, and how other things that they thought were important are not so important, and how maybe some of their misdeeds are major obstacles in the development and birth of their life in the other realms. A soul is called to account for its actions. I think that's the reason Baha'u'llah says, let us do this every day for ourselves, so we don't get out of sorts. I mean, we don't have our accounts all mixed up. Every day we're saying this, we did this, and help us to do that, and strengthen us in that, and if we commit deeds that we shouldn't, give us strength to overcome them, move forward. The moment of death, in the East, there's a whole lot of emphasis on this. You know, let me die at a good moment. Let me not lose my faith at the last minute. There's something about the moment of death that brings people to a sense of reality. May I have a good end, as the Persians oftentimes invoke. And in the time of the Master, they used that. Whatever else, let me end in a good way. When I'm ready to go, Let me not fall back in my faith. Let me not lose faith. Let me not be tormented by any lack of proper vision for entering the next world. So that's something we want to pray about, and of course, we would hope we would be conscious to be able to pray as we're getting ready to depart, but otherwise our dear ones and near ones are going to have to do that for us and assist us. The question of God's mercy and God's justice. There is a standard we all are kept to, but that standard varies from individual to individual. In other words, you are not in a position to look around at other Baha'is and say, well, I'm in a lot better shape than this Baha'i or than that Baha'i, because that shape that you think you're in compared to Abdul Baha'i is not going to be the same. And he's the exemplar, not your neighbor, not your sister, not your brother. So one wants to hold the master as the example, and then we always find we're a little short, or very short, of the goal. And we never become prideful of our achievements. Remember, Mr. Sears used to say, we don't know what our capacity is. God will judge us by what we do with what we have been given. And each of us has been given different measures. We have different, we have different measures of capacity. So let's say an individual, one of us here has been given capacity by God to count to 100, and someone else has been given the capacity to count to 20. And the one that can count to 20 is counting to 19. And the one that can count to 100 is counting to 35. And at 35, he's looking back at the guy that's counting to 19, and he says, look at him, only 19. God is looking down and seeing that we're way short of our capacity, and we don't know what our limit is, but we're taking some pride because we seem to, I've studied the hidden words more than they have. They don't even know what Malakut Abha means, and whatever it happens to be. So we have to be very careful of that. We have to judge ourselves against the standards of the faith, of the writings, and of the Master himself. This is the fairness of God's justice. He doesn't judge us all alike. He judges us on what we're capable of. He measures that along with the circumstances and suffering of our own lives, what we've done for others, the responsibilities we've assumed, and how our spiritual obligations have been carried out. Now, let's see, where are we? I was going to answer a few questions in this session. A few of you sent this up. I don't know where this, someone else asked me about the quote of the Bab about with Muhammad and the clergy. I'll see if I can run that down, but I haven't heard, I heard that years ago. And I just find it difficult to give it up, even though I don't know a source for it. But we'll see what we can do. Yes. Yes, oh, we've got some more? I'm hardly going to deal with these now. Let's see. Just in case. Oh, my goodness. Prolific. Prolific, prolific. Someone said, can you speak a bit about the dark forces of our time and how individuals can fight against them? Of course, the darkness is the absence of light. If you bring light into your life in terms of the spirit of faith, in terms of the interaction with the Word of God, that already is the first step towards getting rid of the effect of the dark forces. The dark forces, the principal ones that Shoghi Effendi says, the greatest enemy of the faith is materialism. Because materialism distracts the soul from its whole purpose. It takes on a whole other aspiration in life, to acquire material goods, to acquire wealth, and sees that as the goal of existence. it's ephemeral. It goes away. Today you have it, tomorrow you don't. It's not the kind of thing we want to concentrate on. There will be times when we're prosperous. There'll be times when we're impoverished. He says you have to view them more or less with the same spirit. God gives and God takes away, and he knows what we need, and he sends us the tests that we need for doing that. So these, principally the dark forces are those things, also ignorance, also prejudice. In the book on the forces of our time, we've made a list of all the ones that Shoghi Effendi has mentioned in his writings, and they are of that nature. There's none of them that are psychic or vampirish or anything of the sort. We're talking about shortcomings of our own lives, in terms of the way, for instance, he says, the friends must beware lest through thinking and feeling negatively about each other, they allow the dark forces to enter their lives. He doesn't say speaking and criticizing. He says thinking and feeling negatively about each other. This is a great distraction. We have to be faced on the positive, on the light. He says we should love everyone. We should love them with that unjudging eye that he says God views us all with. How do we do that? How do we transcend that? Instead of that, we sit and stew about some member in the community that they said, why, can you imagine my Baha'i sister said this to me in the feast, and I just can't get over it, and I can't believe. And another person said, I'm a dinosaur in the community. And another one said this, and another one said that, and fuss and fuss and fuss. And spend the precious hours of our lives in that negative strain. It comes to nothing. How do we rid ourselves? How do we watch our consciousness so that we don't allow those kinds of feeling and thinking negatively about each other? And I mean, I don't know how the rest of you are, but I have to watch that all the time. You get impressions of people every minute. Are you going to dwell on them a long time? You see, can I help this person in some way? If I can't help it, leave them to themselves. It's like in the teaching work, if somebody doesn't respond, okay. He says, leave them to themselves, but pray for them. My wife was always saying that if somebody's acting negatively towards you or is rude to you constantly on a fairly regular basis, if it's a non-Baha'i, you usually don't pay any attention, but Baha'is, you don't want them to do that to you. You don't like, that's not fair. That I can't bear that. Okay. So you pray. She said you pray for them spiritually. Huh? And you ask God to illumine them and to make them more tolerant and understanding of you. And you ask that God help you to be more loving and appreciative of them. And there's always people in our lives that are like that, difficult in that sense. So you pray for them. She warned, she cautioned, she says, of course you don't go and tell them you're praying for them. That spoils the soup, so to speak, How can we encourage longtime believers to be more heartily engaged in the 5-year plan and core activities? Well, keep trying. I think that's basically what you want to do. I hope that the kind of discussions we're having here this weekend will make people who haven't been wholeheartedly supportive to think again how they can do it, that their participation is useful, that their participation is helpful to the other friends in the community. Rather than just being a dead weight and waiting to see what's going to happen, get in and help and see if you can feel some of the positive forces that are being mentioned and highlighted by the House of Justice in its messages and things that are taking place around the Baha'i world. All of that will assist you also spiritually. How can an LSA counsel or console a new Baha'i or non-Baha'i spouse who has lost their husband or their wife? Of course, there's circumstances that are going to be different in each instance, but I think one can share the prayers that we have for the progress of souls in the other world. So this is immediately that, first of all, if they think that their spouses have been annihilated, that discontinued, gone to the grave, and that's the end of it, at least you can address that matter quite clearly from the Baha'i teachings. It's a very hopeful message that all the souls on the other side are dependent on the mercy of God and His greatness, and He is the all-compassionate, the all-merciful. Every soul will progress. The speed of the progress of the souls on the other side depends on what we've done here to some degree, because we catapult ourselves, if you will, through our actions into the next world. But relatively, everybody is moving. Everything moves forward. It's part of the character of creation, of the spiritual creation. So I think we can console them both through the teachings about the continuity of existence after death, and also offer them particularly prayers, or offer to pray for their spouses or loved ones. Would you speak to the problem of mental illness, depression, and anxiety? Can it be healed by prayer? Are they unspiritual, such people? Well, I think anybody that's had anything to deal with, you realize it isn't a question of spirituality or lack of spirituality. Generally, mental illness is a condition that, of course, arises from a number of different circumstances. And I would say you need to consult experts, along with using the prayers, if you have a situation, family situation or something. Try to find competent practitioners who understand these things, and read whatever you can find time to read to help relieve people who are suffering from this kind of depression and anxiety. I think there's these things, if they're resulting from physical conditions, there are recompenses for them in the next life, but that's not particularly a solution for what we face here when we have such a situation in our lives. And sometimes we have ourselves, we want to guard ourselves against falling into depression, and keep our focus on service to mankind, which ultimately means service to those around us. And amongst those are our family members, obviously. If we tell our friends about the faith and how it teaches the equality of men and women, and they later discover that women are not eligible to be members of the House of Justice, some of them may say that this is not true equality. What can we say to them to help them understand and not make the faith seem hypocritical? Well, I think the House of Justice has addressed this in some major letters, one of them to the NSA of New Zealand, which you'd want to ask for a copy of. I'm sure the National Assembly here has it, in which it traces the origin of this ruling of Baha'u'llah. It comes from Baha'u'llah, who has created everything and ordained everything. And he says that the membership of the House of Justice is limited to men. They've asked Abdu'l-Baha about this. You're not the first one to ask. This question has arisen from the very beginning. And Abdu'l-Baha says that it's the reason for it is not known at this time. It will become known and as clear as the sun at midday in the future. I think we can all declare it's not as clear as the sun at midday yet. I don't think we know the answer yet. But it will become clear, he promises us, in the future. So it's a question of faith. There's another element here, which was one I'm going to refer to in another, but I can bring it forward. And that is the tablet of Abdu'l-Baha, where he says that the sex of an individual is not with the soul. It's an accident added to the individual when they take on a physical body. That means that the soul of a man or of a woman is exactly the same before it comes into the body. That when it comes into the body, it has certain responsibilities, it carries out certain functions, it has certain distinctions. As much as we say equality of men and women, they're not equal in the sense that they're not identical. Sometimes we say this and people wonder how they think men and women are exactly identical. I see some differences, you know. It's the question of rights privileges and opportunities, the principle is. They must be the same for both. All right, then you say, well, why aren't they on the House of Justice? Because the same source that said they should have the same rights, privileges, and has made a qualification in the case of the House of Justice, which we don't understand why. Okay, we can leave the faith if we want, but what good does that do? It doesn't solve the problem. So I think we have to just accept this on faith and understand that, I pity the poor woman that has to serve on the House of Justice if such was ever the case, because it's really tough, and it's every day, all day long, and constant tensions. I think also women are, I don't want to say why, because we don't know. If we knew why, he'd tell us why. So I'm not going to tell you why. When we compare the world of the womb and this world, coming to this world with everything that we developed, we need to put to use, and what we know, it's not easy. It's a lot of work in comparison to the next world. Will it be as hard as this world? Do we have to work hard there too to attain yet another world of God? Is that the womb of another world of God? One thing that's in the tablets of the Masters, he says, the tests of God are in this world, not in the next world. We do have setbacks there. We do hear that there are such things as setbacks. We also know it's not a world of eternal bliss, though it is a world of bliss. It's not eternal bliss because we have these passages in the writings that say that the concourse on high is lamenting because of the persecution of some believer here in this world. The actions of men in this world cause grief to those in the other world. But this is not a permanent thing. It comes and goes, I suppose. We don't know. It's very hard for us to judge how to view that from here. So I can't really comment more about that, but I think that we're told that that really is a world of light, and it's untainted by darkness, and if we've been faithful to the requirements of this life, it will be heaven. It will be paradise. It will be a realm of great joy. The question of Baha'is in the military, I think that we know in the faith that we can serve in the military if drafted, if required to serve, but we should ask for non-combatant status. Now, usually people think non-combatant status, you don't want to carry a gun, so you don't want any danger. But actually, the Baha'is in the previous wars have been assigned, where it was possible, they've been assigned to be in intelligence units or in advanced radio lines where they have to go across the enemy lines and establish radio posts and so on, where they have to be dealing as medics, picking up the bodies and remains of the other soldiers, not out of the line of fire, not out of danger, but not being required to themselves engage in an act of killing or combat of that sort. So you can inquire of your National Spiritual Assembly what the terms are of whether you can get an education through the military, under what circumstances. There's some further aspects of that. What about training in the military and when there are no wars? But you don't know about tomorrow, whenever you're in the military, whether there's going to be another war or what's going to happen. But I think the National Assembly can fill you in on details about that. Could you please talk about the worlds beyond our world and what do they encompass? I feel very complimented about that question, that somebody thinks I can answer that. I don't know how to tell you about that. We have those passages that we read of the infinity of the material worlds, Abdu'l-Baha says, judge from that the vast infinity of spiritual worlds. This physical universe alone, they can't find any end to it. It goes on and on and on. And everything organized, breathing, coming alive, great webs of galaxies in the universe, patterns and things that you see in the smallest of things reflected in the vast greatness of the universe and its mysteries. It's again, it tells us something about how great the spiritual worlds must be, how vast they must be. In the Baha'i community of the United States, some believers seem to have very strong attachment to political parties and talk either in favor or against one or the other. Is that allowable? How far is a Baha'i allowed to get involved in politics? For example, holding political office. Are Baha'is allowed or encouraged to vote? Certainly the Baha'is are allowed and encouraged to vote. It depends on the country you're in. Sometimes some of the countries they only have one party. And in order for you to be considered a citizen of that country, you have to vote. And the House of Justice says you vote. As far as backing one political party or another, I think you'd want to be careful of that. None of the political parties have a platform that corresponds at all to the Baha'i teachings and the universal nature of the Baha'i concept of society. And certainly it pits us one against the other if we start supporting candidates and things in a lively way. And these are palliatives. They're temporary solutions, friends. We got to go for the big one. We need to promote the growth of the cause in the world till we get ourselves to the threshold of the lesser peace, and beyond that to world federation, and finally the elimination of partisan politics in the sense of that a country feels it has to have those, and if it doesn't have those, it doesn't have democracy. I don't know, it's just quite an interesting area of subject. I'm not terribly informed about it, but I think we have to be careful of not involving ourselves in partisan disputes and difficulties. That doesn't mean we shouldn't read the newspaper and shouldn't be well informed about both sides and thinking about how the Baha'i teachings could resolve such problems. What are those elements in the teachings that would assist with the resolution of the difficulties? It's part of a useful exercise that we can engage in keeping ourselves properly informed so that we don't look like ignoramus if somebody asks a question about this, like me at the moment here. So, yes, allowed and encouraged to vote. Okay, as Baha'is, we're obliged to obey our government no matter how corrupt it might be. In Iran, the government has told Baha'is not to organize. Despite this, the Yaran have formed. Therefore, isn't it only fair that they have been prosecuted, that they have because they have broken the law? How can the House of Justice condone the Baha'is organizing into groups in Iran when the government has said otherwise? I think this is a little bit out of sequence, you know. There's a different sequence to things. In other words, the government didn't say we couldn't have any organization. Out of the persecution, the Yaran were formed years ago, several decades ago, and they were operating and they were having a regular interaction with an agent of the government to explain that the Baha'is were keeping the order in the Baha'i community. There didn't seem to be any problem with that. It got to a stage where they decided they couldn't, and that they must disband. And the Yaran, upon that order, disbanded. And the House of Justice supported them in that, obviously. It was only after that that the individual members of the former Yaran were arrested, and their persecution began. And that was on the basis of what they had done previously before they disbanded. So every time the government said disband, we've disbanded. when they said the National Assembly was illegal, we disbanded the National Assembly. Local assemblies also were disbanded. So even the committees, we told them that there are no now teaching committees in Iran. But the Baha'is of Iran are smart. They're on the internet. They know the core activities, call of the House of Justice, and they do individually as families and between families and among the friends in the community. They keep themselves alive and keep encouraging each other. But there is no formal organization inside the country directing its operations. So I think you can't say that it's only fair that since they've broken the law, because as soon as they were told what the law is, dictated the law, they did disband. People that commit suicide, are they forgiven? Can you see them in the next life? How does their soul progress? Well, everything falls on the mercy of God in the next world, but certainly there's enough tablets of Abdu'l-Baha to individuals, people whose spouses have committed suicide or their children have committed suicide, that they assure the soul that they'll be okay. They're going to be trained. Some souls are overburdened to the extent where they take their own lives. While we're alive, we're forbidden to do it, but we don't condemn those who've done it after they're on the other side. That's another matter. That's then in God's hands, and we pray for their progress, and we realize that we are not in a position to really judge the circumstances that cause them to exceed the limits of this ruling. What is the best way to deal with backbiting in a social situation? I think that's a marvelous topic for community consultation. Get together and argue it out. On the one hand, you can say, don't listen. But sometimes that doesn't help. Sometimes you have to gently say that really this is bordering, our conversation is bordering on backbiting. It would probably be better if we abstain from that. Maybe it needs a stronger medicine than say, I'm not going to listen to such things. But you don't want to be insulting to the other person. You want them to benefit and learn from the advice. And Abdu'l-Baha says that he extols us to reason, is this useful, is this helpful? This doesn't really solve the problems that we're criticizing here. And we have a very strong law against it from Baha'u'llah. Abstain from backbiting. Is it that the soul knows the proximity of death and prepares? That's a mysterious question. We don't know. Some people do feel they have premonitions. And they feel the time is coming to the end. You've seen loved ones perhaps pass away, and you tell them they've decided to not eat anymore, or they said, I'm going, and they go. There are a number of instances of stories that you hear, and perhaps you've seen it yourself, where the loved ones from the other side come and visit the soul that's about to pass. And even sometimes the souls say, oh, I saw Uncle Harry. I didn't know he died. And Uncle Harry's died, but they haven't told the family, they haven't told the sick person, because they say it's going to be too much of a blow, so we won't tell them. Meanwhile, Uncle Harry comes and presents himself from the spiritual side and says, we're waiting for you, and we're all prepared for you. So that's an interesting complication. Did Baha'u'llah write the prayers from his inner being to his outer being, as well as from the outer being to his inner being, like you spoke of? Plenty of instances of the deprivations that they suffered, and who can imagine people say, well, Baha'u'llah, the claims are he suffered more than anybody in history. Okay, why? Well, you think through it. He said, well, the killing fields in Thailand or in whatever, Cambodia were worse than that. How can you say that he suffered more? He suffered more because he had consciousness of what the human race could be if it responded to his message. Imagine the Lord calls humanity to embrace him, and humanity turns its back. The kings turn their back. They persecute you and send you to prison. And instead of escaping from that, in a sense, with the powers that surely the manifestation has, he submits to it. And he says, by submitting to it, he frees us from the chains and limitations of our lower selves. We look and see that he feels nothing for this life, worries not about this life. And then anything that happens to us in the path of God, we say, well, look what Baha'u'llah passed through, look what the Master passed through. Announced that the marathon will block Congress Avenue on Sunday morning. This one says question, but there's no question mark. Let's see. Here's the other side. Since I have become a Baha'i, I have noticed that I find it harder and harder to be punctual. Is there a Baha'i... Is there a Baha'i quality of tardy? A virtue? Well, this is one of these subtle reminders that one of the friends has given us. Hope we can be on time. I can't say I've been absolutely punctual in these sessions, so I don't want to comment on that today. Do we as Baha'is have guardian angels? As a small child, I felt someone was with me as I slept. I think there's a lot of room for that kind of thing. There's a tablet of Baha'u'llah's that he talks about the ranks, the various ranks of angels, interprets them. And he said there are those angels who are assigned to assist the believers, and there's other angels who are assigned to note down all our actions one by one so that we will have, there's a proper accounting for us in the end. I know some of you putting on very grim faces at that comment. We hope that those angels are angels also of light and love, and that we want to defeat them in their, don't give them things to note down. But I think there are certainly the presence of those who are concerned for us, our loved ones and others, that may be assigned to assist us in one way or another that we feel sometimes. All of this, the one power of God acts through all those levels. You know, he talks about how the detached souls are the source of the arts and sciences in this world. They're in that world, but they are a leaven that leavens the progress of society here. So they're serving the whole of mankind in that sense. And the souls that go to the next world, as we'll see talking about the activities of these souls tomorrow, are not at all idle. There's plenty to do and quite a bit of parallel feeling to what happens in this world. I read in the books about that. I don't know personally. You realize that, you know, in case you hear me sounding like I know what I'm talking about. Can you explain about the dispensation for elderly plus 70 from saying obligatory prayers? Is it all right to try and we are okay if we forget, or forgot if we said it, or not? Or should we not try to remember? Or is it okay to say it occasionally? I'm over 70 and I can relate to all of that very, very keenly. I remember, you know, the problem of going and doing your wuzu, doing your washing, the ablutions, and coming out and going on with life, and then realizing I said the ablutions and I didn't say the prayer afterwards, you know. I was so relieved at 70 that I didn't have to worry about saying a long obligatory prayer later in the day if I didn't manage the noon one. So I think it's a great blessing. But there's no problem There's nothing that you're exempt from it, but you're not forbidden from it. And I know Ria Khanum, way over 70, she was fasting all the time. She used to tell me, you need some protein in the morning, Hooper. I eat a couple of pork chops first thing in the morning. I was never too good at eating a lot of meat in the morning, but that was... It seems like, particularly fasting, it's hard to give up the benefits of it. Wow. Okay. Got a number of questions. How are we doing with time here? We've got 10 minutes more? 15 minutes more? What is it? Something like that? Okay. What was your service in the House of Justice like? What do you think helped you to sustain your service in that body? And what sort of qualities, education, experiences will help Baha'is in Baha'i administration and serving the general public? Another question, who writes the messages of the House of Justice, and does the entire body work together to write the messages? 3, does it require a unanimous vote to make a decision or a majority? Is there dissension in the House of Justice? And how do you bring about unity? You know, I would say, going from the bottom up, that cordiality reigns in the House of Justice generally. I've seen very little outbreak of animosities or concern. Passionate, the members are about the faith and about the teachings and about how they feel about it. The clash of differing opinions is right there, but it's the clash of opinions and not the clash of the members. So the cordiality reigns, and how that happens, I don't know, but it's somehow Baha'u'llah protects us. And so that's important to know. The message of the House of Justice, for instance, the Rizwan message, and this is my own perception of it, other members may explain it in a different way. We have a general consultation in which all the members in the course of a day or two express what kind of things they think should come into the next Rizwan message or the next major message, whatever it is. And a number of members are taking notes. And then the House of Justice will decide, 2 members will go out and make a first draft based on this consultation. And now you've been in there years, you have a kind of feeling of how the thing is going to go. So you try to express the various homogenous combination of the ideas that have been stated. You come back with a draft that's then given 9 copies around the table. It's read out, the whole thing first, to get the general flow and spirit of it, and then you go back paragraph by paragraph. The sense of this paragraph, is this what we want? Is it not what we want? Does this third sentence belong here? I think this paragraph I suggest is this goes to the end. This is the climax of the message. Why do we have it up at the beginning? And it goes back and forth in discussion, paragraph by paragraph, line by line, adjective by adjective, until we have a set of corrections on top of that first draft. And a general feeling that we're moving in the right direction. Otherwise, we'd reassign the whole thing from the beginning. That goes out and comes back. That's now draft number 1. Draft number 2, the same process takes place again. I think when I left the House of Justice Nauruz, we were in the process of doing the Rizwan message. I believe it was 5 or 6 drafts that had already passed through. And after I left the House, it went through a couple more. Believe me, friends, this is the expression of the will of the House of Justice. And it isn't a question of dissension. There's no dissension in it. Everybody has a moderating influence and a guiding influence, and that's the way these messages come out. I remember years ago, I was meeting with the Pilgrims one time, and one lady that asked for questions, one lady put her hand up. She says, I know that the House of Justice writes the Rizwan message, but what else do you do? I didn't know quite how to respond. The audience, a great part of the audience laughed the way you laughed when she asked that. And I said, "Do you think it's easy to write the Rizwan message?" But it doesn't take all year, and we do have other activities that we engaged in. Then, well, I don't know what I can tell you about. What helped me to serve in the House of Justice? How do you think sustain your service in that body? Qualities, education, experiences will help Baha'is in Baha'i administration. I think that the first prerequisite is to know the faith and try to live the faith as best you can. Obey the faith, obey the teachings, and apply them in your service. Well, the other great bounty that the House of Justice has is it operates there in the shadow of the shrines, the holy shrines, and it visits the holy shrines regularly, and it prays for the friends, and it prays for the House of Justice, prays for its members, and so on, for its own guidance. The qualities that we see extolled in the book Baha'i Administration, Shoghi Effendi outlines the ideal qualities of members of consultative bodies, of elected assemblies, both local and national. There are qualifications, obviously, for those qualifications extend also to the House of Justice members. I don't know what else I could tell you about that. How are we doing? What's a typical day like for a member of the House of Justice? What's involved long term? Well, we have, most of the time that I was on the House of Justice, there were periods of the year where we'd meet all day, every day, but mostly we would meet 3 times a week. And on the other days, we would carry out the work decided in those sessions, because the nature of the work of the House of Justice is divided amongst the 9 members. They all have their own areas of interest and expertise, so that the letters, original incoming letters, are routed to a member first, who then presents it as part of the agenda, puts it on the agenda, and copies go to everybody, so everybody sees it. But that member is kind of controlling responsible to take down the decision of the House of Justice, to see that a draft is made, to bring it either back to the House of Justice or send it on its way after it has 5 initials on the draft. So it's pretty equally distributed out. The House of Justice has got 9 secretaries, in a sense. And then those 9 secretaries have teams backing up each of them to bring backup, to bring the history of a matter to their attention. Most mornings before the House of Justice would meet, I would read for an hour, hour and a half, get up and read. I couldn't read at night, I'd fall asleep, but in the morning I could read and then go to the office, to the meetings, and have knowledge ahead of time of the agenda items. Obviously, when it becomes overwhelming, you do that in a more cursory manner, and then you see in the House of Justice members themselves will say, this was all too much to absorb. Let us postpone this agenda item till such and such a date, and everyone come prepared. So there's a lot of day-to-day, long-term, I don't want to say burden, but it was a burden. I mean, the sense of the things that came to the House of Justice had to be dealt with. They had to be dealt with. You had to be on the job. I feel just a little bit like 10 years younger, since 6 months have passed since I left. If you had 30 minutes to an hour per day or a week, how would you go about teaching the Baha'i faith? I suppose following all the kind of things that we've been talking about. I mean, saying your prayers and then looking for opportunities to present the faith, remaining alert not only for when you have an intensive program of growth, an organized activity where you know you're going to be focused, but the intensive program of growth doesn't take you off the responsibility of being conscious every day, all day long in your interactions with your colleagues and friends and fellow students or whoever it is, all of that, you still have to be alert. You ask for Baha'u'llah so that these minutes or hour per day can be used in the most effective manner. You touched on distractions. Can you say a few words about how we can help our youth in this society and new youth who are coming to the faith? I don't know. It's a very serious matter how to not curtail that our existence not be joyous, but at the same time that we sober up and stop wasting time. Our lives are too short, and we use them up with distractions and entertainments. If you're going to have those, be sure you have some solid study time and meditation and prayer in your daily activities. It isn't that good times are not allowed, but wasting time is not allowed. Abdu'l-Baha says we should be careful that we don't waste time. So you look at the kind of things you engage in. If you need them to gain, to rest, to get more energy, to go forward, that's legitimate. But if it's simply a waste of your energies, then think about how you spend your time, revise it. By offering more activities in the community that are of a serious nature, that can engage the minds of our young people, I think that'd be important. Well, this is not entirely clear to me what the question is, but it has to do with how does one console a friend who has lost a person that's close to them, and this has resulted in them disputing with God. There are periods like that, I think, in people's lives, and sometimes they're only temporary. But anything we can do to help people across that bridge is very helpful. And Baha'is sometimes, it happens to Baha'is themselves, non-Baha'is, of course, easily, but the teachings of the faith are the means of overcoming all that kind of. Let's see what this is here. Some of these will have to leave for another session, I think, friends. We're just about done here. I don't want to pour more water than this platform has capacity to withstand. Can you elucidate on the quote, "To know oneself is to know God"? The mirror of our inner being we talked about. There's many, many answers to this, but the one that immediately comes to mind is that cleansing the mirror, we see the light of God reflected in it. We become conscious of that presence within us of the emanation, a moving, living emanation that's the center of our being, the core of our being, and has its own consciousness. And that in that way we come to appreciate and praise God. We see things in the mirror of our own being. We feel things in our own souls, or we're prompted to feel things by looking at others. Sometimes the eyes of others will communicate things to us that we need to know and will make us aware. Sometimes the tone of the voice of a chanter will reach us in a way that opens us to a greater understanding of our own inner beings. Lots of ways there. Here's one for general consultation again. Any suggestion on how best to teach the faith to a 16-year-old who's not interested in anything, if it remotely resembles school or anything her parents have to say? I think that junior youth activity is starting to crack that. In other words, if you give the teenager a role in doing something useful, or if they see others doing something useful, and that begins to suggest to them that there are things they can do which would help other souls, you might find that you've got an idealism you didn't imagine was present in that child. But that requires that the assemblies wisely and the area teaching committees wisely promote this whole question of junior youth and youth activities. Youth activities together, if they can have some greater spiritual content. And if we don't teach the faith as if it were a school subject, that will be a help. Oh, just in time here. What about angels is the question. We'll come back to that another time. Thank you very much, friends.